The fleet arrived above Earth with a confidence born from centuries of easy victories. They had crushed countless species, erased civilizations, and absorbed worlds into their empire without breaking stride. To them, Earth was a small blue marble filled with frightened primitives whose time had finally run out. From orbit, their warships broadcast messages in tones dripping with superiority, demanding that humanity surrender unconditionally. The words echoed across every channel: resistance is futile, obedience will guarantee survival. They expected trembling compliance, the desperate pleas of a lesser species begging for mercy. The first hours of their presence unfolded exactly as they imagined. Across the globe, fear gripped billions. News networks replayed images of vast alien vessels eclipsing the sun, and whispers spread of weapons capable of vaporizing cities. Families crowded around screens, leaders convened in frantic emergency sessions, and many believed the end of human civilization had arrived. The alien commanders watched from orbit with amusement, confident the planet would soon bow as so many others had. Yet beneath the surface of that fear simmered something different. Human history was written in defiance: wars against overwhelming odds, rebellions against impossible empires, survival through calamities that should have ended nations. The aliens saw only fractured governments and antiquated militaries. They failed to recognize the undercurrent of stubborn resilience woven into the species they faced. When the first official communication came from Earth's representatives, the aliens leaned forward, expecting capitulation. Instead, they heard voices steady, firm, and unwilling to bend. There was no promise of surrender, no trembling acknowledgement of alien authority. Instead, humanity's message was simple: we do not bow. It was not bravado shouted in desperation, but a statement of identity. The refusal puzzled the invaders, for they were accustomed to cowed obedience, not open defiance. Across the globe, ordinary people processed the invasion in their own ways. Some wept in despair, some prayed for salvation, but many clenched their jaws and prepared themselves. The knowledge that annihilation could come at any moment did not paralyze them, it sparked something primal. A mother in a small town comforted her children with words of strength. A soldier, staring at the sky filled with alien ships, tightened his grip on his weapon even knowing it could not pierce their shields. Hackers probed digital defenses, scientists whispered of unconventional weapons, and millions silently resolved that if this was to be the end, it would not come with their knees on the ground. The alien high command dismissed these signs as meaningless. Their assessments described humans as chaotic, divided, and technologically backward. Their analysts underestimated the importance of those very traits. They could not fathom a civilization that had survived endless conflict by adapting, improvising, and persisting long after logic dictated surrender. The Empire measured strength by fleets and firepower. Humanity measured it by will. As the days of orbiting intimidation passed, frustration grew among the invaders. Why had Earth not responded with capitulation? Why were there no delegations begging for terms? Instead of submission, they intercepted broadcasts of speeches declaring unity, resolve, and defiance. Instead of panic tearing societies apart, they observed cooperation forming across borders once locked in rivalry. To the aliens, this defiance was an anomaly, a dangerous deviation from the pattern of conquest they had perfected. The truth was dawning on them slowly: humanity was not simply afraid of death. The species had endured extinction events, plagues, world wars, and countless tragedies, and each catastrophe had only forged deeper endurance. To threaten annihilation was to challenge the very quality that defined them. Where others saw survival in submission, humans saw meaning only in resistance. The alien fleet loomed above Earth, confident still in its weapons, yet uneasy in ways it could not articulate. The seeds of fear were being planted, not by human guns but by human defiance. The invaders had expected another easy conquest, but what they found instead was a world staring back at them with unyielding eyes. The first chapter of this war would not end with humanity broken. It would end with the invaders realizing that Earth was unlike any species they had ever encountered. They had demanded surrender, but what they awakened instead was humanity's resolve to fight until the very last breath. And in that moment, though the aliens did not yet admit it, The war they believed already won had shifted onto uncertain ground. The invaders expected hesitation to give way to eventual submission, yet what followed was the opposite. The refusal to bow, echoed by leaders in defiant words, ignited a fire across every corner of the planet. Governments that once argued endlessly about borders and trade suddenly spoke with one voice. Messages spread through every broadcast system and digital channel. Humanity would resist, not because victory was certain, but because surrender was unacceptable. The alien empire had underestimated not just the technology of Earth, but the psychology of its people. Fear had already given way to defiance. In capitals across the globe, leaders who had long distrusted one another agreed without hesitation that humanity must stand together. Rival states shared intelligence, scientists pooled resources, and militaries opened their arsenals to one another. The fractured world the invaders believed easy to conquer was binding itself tighter with every threat broadcast from orbit. The demand to kneel had forced unity where centuries of diplomacy had failed. Even those who doubted the possibility of survival admitted that the act of resistance was itself a duty. Ordinary citizens embraced that duty as fiercely as any soldier. Entire neighborhoods organized to protect one another, communities pooled supplies, and volunteers lined up to serve in hastily assembled defense forces. On digital frontiers, hackers declared their own war, probing alien systems and hunting for weaknesses. In laboratories, engineers sketched designs for improvised weapons, seeking to turn every scrap of machinery into something that might wound the enemy. Farmers, workers, and students all asked the same question: how can I contribute? This shared determination was not coordinated from above but rose spontaneously from countless individuals refusing to be passive. The first strikes were small, almost insignificant compared to the scale of the invasion, but their symbolic power was immense. A naval vessel fired on a landing craft, sinking it despite impossible odds. Resistance fighters destroyed an alien patrol with carefully prepared explosives. Cyber attacks forced malfunctions in orbital communication relays. Each act sent a message louder than words. Humanity would not wait to be slaughtered, it would strike back wherever possible. The aliens, accustomed to quick capitulations, grew frustrated as their attempts at intimidation bred only deeper hostility. The refusal to kneel confused the alien hierarchy. Reports circulated through their command channels describing behavior that defied their expectations. Analysts wrote in disbelief that human populations were not fracturing under fear but galvanizing. Entire societies were accepting the likelihood of destruction yet fighting regardless. The Empire had faced rebellions before, but always after conquest, never in the opening days when resistance was most hopeless. The psychological profile they had built for humanity was crumbling with each intercepted transmission and each battlefield encounter. This resistance was not blind desperation but an expression of identity. Humanity had always been defined by its unwillingness to submit to overwhelming forces. History's record was one long chain of uprisings, revolutions, and last stands where survival seemed impossible. The invaders saw this now firsthand, and though they still dismissed Earth as technologically inferior, they began to whisper among themselves about the cost of such a campaign. Conquering Earth would not be quick, nor would it be bloodless. The speeches of leaders crystallized this spirit. No promises of easy victory were made, no illusions offered. Instead, they declared that humanity's strength lay in its refusal to be ruled. They acknowledged the danger and the suffering that lay ahead, but insisted that dignity demanded resistance even if the species burned for it. The alien fleet intercepted these speeches, and what they considered reckless bravado spread across their ranks like a toxin. The notion that a civilization would rather perish than submit was deeply unsettling to an empire built on the assumption of fear-driven compliance. In the cities, in the countryside, and on the seas, humanity prepared itself for the coming storm. The defiance was not about the certainty of winning but about rejecting the certainty of subjugation. This determination resonated across the planet, hardening resolve where once only terror reigned. For the first time, the aliens realized their enemy was not composed of scattered, frightened individuals but of a unified species with a single, unbreakable conviction. The war had barely begun, but already the Empire faced something it had not anticipated: a foe unwilling to measure survival by submission. Humanity had drawn a line in the soil of its world and dared the invaders to cross it. And in that act, the first true weapon of Earth was revealed, not its machines, not its armies, but the unrelenting will of its people. The aliens descended with certainty that ground operations would conclude swiftly. Their armored columns rolled into cities expecting parades of submission, but instead found themselves in hostile terrain where every alley, rooftop, and shadow concealed resistance. Earth's geography itself became a weapon. In dense jungles, their machines stalled in humidity and mud, sensors clogged, and supply lines fractured. Deserts stripped their equipment of efficiency, sand infiltrating delicate systems. Mountains concealed ambushes where small human units struck and vanished. What was intended as a show of dominance became a grinding ordeal where progress was measured not in victories but in losses. Human fighters used the land with an instinct honed by millennia of survival. Rivers became traps, forests became mazes, and cities turned into fortresses of defiance. Improvised explosives hidden in roadways crippled alien transports. Skirmishes erupted at night, where familiarity with the environment gave humans the advantage. Entire neighborhoods worked in silent coordination, providing intelligence, smuggling weapons, and ensuring no invader walked unobserved. Every environment that had once challenged humanity now became an extension of its will to resist. Alien forces, trained to fight disciplined armies, struggled against this unpredictable tide. They relied on centralized command, yet human resistance operated without waiting for orders. Independent groups adapted tactics on the fly, turning chaos into advantage. A squad cut off from communication still fought on, improvising with whatever lay at hand. Commanders recorded frustration in their logs. These humans did not behave like soldiers of any species encountered before. They did not need cohesion to be effective. They thrived on unpredictability. Captured alien technology quickly became tools of defiance. Weapons ripped from fallen invaders were studied and repurposed, their energy cells powering makeshift devices. Hacked drones were turned back against their masters, guided by ingenuity rather than formal training. Engineers pieced together hybrid machines from alien wreckage and human scrap, creating weapons that should not have functioned yet did. Every battlefield became a laboratory where human creativity turned weakness into strength. Even the biosphere joined the struggle. The alien soldiers, adapted to sterile worlds and controlled environments, were vulnerable to Earth's diversity. Local pathogens slipped past their medical precautions, felling troops with fevers and infections. Predators stalked them in the wild, immune to their intimidation. Weather battered them with storms they could not predict. For humanity, this planet had always been both cradle and crucible. For the invaders, it was an unrelenting gauntlet of hazards they had never trained to endure. Alien morale began to crack. Reports from officers described troops fearful of venturing into the field, soldiers whispering that the very world seemed allied with its people. Casualties mounted not only from combat but from the environment itself. Strategic analysts, who once claimed conquest would take days, revised their estimates into months and then years. For the first time, the Empire considered that this campaign might not be worth the cost. Human defiance sharpened with every small victory. News of ambushes spread rapidly across networks still operating despite alien attempts to silence them. Each destroyed patrol or disabled transport became a rallying cry, proof that the invincible could be bled. Civilians in occupied zones risked everything to pass intelligence, their sacrifices fueling the broader struggle. The invaders saw submission in other conquests. On Earth, every life lost only hardened resistance further. The Empire had assumed technological superiority was decisive, yet they discovered that ingenuity could narrow that gulf faster than expected. Machines calibrated for efficiency faltered against opponents who fought with unpredictability. A child with a slingshot distracting a patrol could alter the timing of an ambush. A scientist improvising a weapon from alien scraps could shift the outcome of a skirmish. Nothing followed the patterns the aliens expected, and in that chaos, humans thrived. Whispers spread through the alien ranks. They began calling humanity predators, a species that fought not only for survival but with an instinct to stalk and strike without warning. The invaders realized that their prey was something altogether different, a species that had evolved in a world of constant conflict and hardship. Every clash drove that lesson deeper. Earth was not simply resisting, it was hunting those who dared invade. The tide began to shift when humanity proved it could not merely endure but strike decisively. What started as scattered defiance transformed into coordinated action. Across continents, once divided nations synchronized their efforts, exchanging intelligence and aligning strategies with unprecedented speed. Networks of resistance linked together, sharing successes and failures so that no lesson was wasted. The war, once thought to be a matter of survival, was turning into a contest of dominance. The invaders, who believed they had mastered conquest, now faced an opponent that was learning faster than they could adapt. The first major breakthrough came when coordinated strikes targeted a warship in orbit. Human ingenuity fused with stolen alien technology, and improvised weapons achieved what was thought impossible. Energy blasts and missiles battered its defenses, overwhelming them through relentless pressure. The ship, crippled and burning, fell from the sky in a spectacle that the entire planet witnessed. The moment was more than a tactical victory, it was proof that the invaders were not untouchable. Confidence spread like wildfire, and people who had braced themselves for annihilation began to believe in the possibility of triumph. With unity came innovation. Scientists across the globe abandoned bureaucratic rivalries, sharing discoveries openly and repurposing alien materials into new arsenals. Engineers created hybrids of human machinery and captured technology, weapons crude in appearance but devastating in effect. Drones once under alien control were reprogrammed to strike their former masters, while communication systems designed for suppression became tools of global coordination. Every battlefield became a proving ground, each engagement a test that sharpened humanity's edge. The psychological balance began to tilt. For every loss inflicted on Earth, the invaders now paid in blood and metal far beyond their expectations. Skirmishes turned into routs, patrols vanished without trace, and supply lines were shredded by ambush after ambush. Alien commanders demanded reinforcements, their pride wounded and their confidence shaken. Reports sent back to their empire spoke of a war spiraling out of control, describing a species that refused to follow any pattern of conquest. The change was visible not just in battles but in the spirit of humanity itself. Fear gave way to determination, and determination gave way to aggression. No longer content with survival, humanity began to plan offensives. Militias evolved into armies, their weapons sharpened by experience. Propaganda once intended to comfort civilians transformed into defiant declarations broadcast into space, messages that told the Empire and every other listening power that Earth would never surrender. The world was no longer begging for mercy, it was daring its enemies to continue the fight. This shift terrified the invaders more than any weapon. They had expected compliance, then resistance, but not escalation. They now faced a foe that fought harder the more pressure was applied, a species that seemed to grow stronger with every sacrifice. Commanders debated among themselves whether the campaign could be sustained. Soldiers muttered that this war was not a conquest but a descent into a nightmare. The myths of invincibility that once shielded the Empire were dissolving against the reality of human ferocity. Each victory reinforced the unity of Earth. Nations that had spent centuries in rivalry stood shoulder to shoulder. Former enemies exchanged technology and resources without hesitation. People who had once seen themselves as separate identities now saw only one, human. This unity, forged in fire, created a momentum that the Empire could not match. They wielded superior weapons, but they lacked the one element that humanity possessed in abundance, an unbreakable will tied to collective survival. The invaders had come to Earth expecting a swift conquest. What they now faced was a growing storm that threatened to sweep them from the skies. Every loss, every retreat, every failure carved the truth deeper into their memory. Humanity was not merely resisting, it was turning resistance into retaliation. The war no longer belonged to the Empire, it belonged to Earth, and the momentum was shifting irreversibly. The final stage of the conflict arrived not with silence, but with the roar of a united planet refusing to bend. The Alien Council, furious at the mounting failures, issued one last ultimatum to Earth. They demanded immediate capitulation, promising annihilation if humanity did not kneel. The message, transmitted across every channel, was received with laughter rather than fear. Leaders, soldiers, and ordinary citizens alike treated it not as a threat but as confirmation that the invaders were weakening. The Empire's words no longer inspired terror, they revealed desperation. Humanity answered with action. From hidden facilities, hastily assembled fleets emerged, craft cobbled together from naval hulls, industrial frames, and stolen alien engines. They were rough, patched with ingenuity and desperation, but they could fly, and more importantly, they could fight. Every ship represented sacrifice, metal scavenged from ruined cities, fuel diverted from civilian needs, volunteers willing to risk their lives with no guarantee of return. Together they formed a symbol not of advanced technology, but of wool forged into steel. The assault on the alien armada was reckless by every traditional measure. Human fleets launched with fewer weapons, weaker shields, and little coordination compared to their enemy. Yet what they lacked in polish they compensated for in relentless determination. Pilots hurled themselves into combat with the knowledge that each strike, each sacrifice, bought survival for those below. Crude missiles and hybrid weapons tore into alien hulls. Swarms of improvised drones overloaded defensive systems. The sky became a storm of fire where discipline and superiority faltered against chaos wielded with purpose. Alien warships, once symbols of invulnerability, began to fall. A carrier lost power under sustained human fire, its bulk drifting before exploding in orbit. Smaller vessels were boarded by soldiers who fought with blades and rifles, repurposing the very corridors of enemy ships into battlegrounds. Each victory cost lives, yet each loss of life carried meaning, carving deeper fear into the Empire's ranks. For the first time in centuries, their forces retreated not from strategy but from the instinct of survival. On the ground, humanity's push matched the ferocity of the skies. Coordinated strikes dismantled occupation strongholds, while captured alien weapons amplified the effectiveness of every counterattack. Civilians who once hid in fear now openly defied their oppressors, emboldened by the sight of burning warships overhead. Across the globe, the cry was the same: Earth would never kneel. The invaders, once proud conquerors, now scrambled to extract survivors and retreat from a planet that bled them dry. The Alien Council faced a truth they had never considered. To conquer Earth was not to add another world to their empire, but to invite endless war that no measure of power could end. Humanity had proven it would fight in every alley, jungle, ocean, and sky. To dominate such a species was not victory but suicide. Reluctantly, bitterly, the order was given to withdraw. Their fleets departed scarred, carrying with them the humiliation of defeat at the hands of those they once dismissed as primitives. Humanity did not celebrate with arrogance. The cost had been immense: cities scarred, millions lost, and the planet itself marked by the struggle. Yet amidst the ruins, a stronger identity had been forged. Nations stood not as rivals but as one people who had fought together and survived together. The scars were heavy, but they carried meaning. Earth had endured against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. That endurance was its greatest weapon, and it had been proven beyond question. Word of the defeat spread across the stars. To other civilizations, the Empire's warning was no longer a declaration of dominance but of caution. They spoke in hushed tones of humanity, a species that would rather burn than bow, a predator clothed in the skin of a fragile creature, a force that could not be tamed. Fear traveled faster than fleets, and respect grew in places where Earth had once been unknown. The war ended not because humanity destroyed the Empire, but because the Empire understood the cost of continuing. Humanity had shown that submission was not in its nature, and that lesson would ripple outward for generations. No invader would ever look upon the blue planet the same way again. What had begun as an expected conquest ended as a legacy carved in fire. Earth, bloodied but unbroken, forever marked as the world that refused to surrender and proved its might among the stars.